One definition that we ought to clear up is the difference between velocity and speed. I know earlier I sort of casually used the term speed and then corrected myself and said I should use velocity. So let's be clear on what the distinction is. Velocity is a signed quantity. In other words, it can be positive or negative. And generally, what we do is we interpret, if we assume we have some direction that we consider to be positive, like let's consider that the origin, and we consider toward the right to be the positive direction, we would consider motion in that direction to be a positive velocity. I'll write that as positive v, and we would consider motion in this direction to be a negative velocity. And if you think about it, that makes sense because what we're talking about is the idea that velocity is a rate of change. It is the rate at which the position is changing, or the rate at which the displacement is changing. Well, if we measure displacement in terms of how many units to the right of this point 0 the object is, if the object is moving this way, then its displacement is decreasing. Its displacement in this direction goes from 3 to 1, or if I put a negative 1 there, it goes from, let's say, 1 to negative 1. Its actual displacement number is decreasing. So it makes sense that if the velocity is the rate of change of the displacement, that an object that is going to the left would be treated as having a negative velocity. So the what speed does is it ignores direction and simply asks how fast the object is moving. So speed is, we can think of it as just the absolute value of the velocity. If we suppose, for example, that v of 10 is 0.0001, so that's 1/10,000th, and v of 15 is negative 150, we want to compare the velocity and speed at times 10 seconds and 15 seconds. What we can see is that at time 10 seconds, the velocity is actually greater than it is at time 15. In other words, v of 10 is actually greater than v of 15. This is a purely numerical problem that we get based on the fact that a positive 0.0001 is a greater number than negative 150. However, at time 10, the speed is much lower. In other words, is much lower than it is at 15. So we can think of it as though at time 10, the object is crawling, 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 crawling to the right. At time 15, it's racing to the left. But when we're considering when we're considering the signed quantity, we would say that the velocity, this crawl to the right is a greater velocity than this race to the left. But if we're considering only the actual amount of speed, in other words, without regard to direction, then we would say the speed is higher at velocity of 15.